Welcome back to another episode of From the Couch Sports. This is episode 22, and I am Connor, your host. If you like the show, then please like and subscribe to the video. I got a few things I want to get into. Some basketball conference finals we've got going on currently. And then I want to talk some MMA after that. And then we're going to cover the NBA lottery as well. But to start things, tonight was the Warriors Mavericks Game 2 in Golden State, and this was a fun game. The Mavs actually started off really good. At one point, I think they had a 20-point lead, if not maybe even a little bit more, against the Warriors, and things were just looking really good for the Mavs. And then in the second half, the Warriors, they put in their bench, and like Jordan Poole had a huge game. He had 23 points. Otto Porter had a big game off the bench. And then, like, the rest of the team just started clicking. Clay had 15. Kevon Looney had 21. And then Andrew Wiggins was playing really good as well. He had 16 as well. And then Steph kind of took over in the fourth quarter. He had a couple threes in a row. He had a nice finish and one on Luka. So he finished the game with 32. Luka had a crazy game as well. He had over 40 points. It wasn't enough. He wasn't getting as much help in the second half, and there was a big point of the fourth quarter that Luka didn't even really play in. He was on the bench, and that's kind of when things went downhill for them. But it was a fun game, and now we look at it with the Warriors up 2-0 going into Dallas, and like. All things look like the Warriors are going to dominate this series and, probably finish in 4 or 5 games. But recently Mavs went in against the Suns and they went down 2-0 to start the series and then they won. I think the difference here is that the Warriors are a much better team and they've been in this position before. They've got more experience than a team like the Suns. I don't see them falling into the same thing that the Suns did. I feel like the Suns started to kind of hurt themselves and they kind of fell apart in that series, and I don't see the same thing happening with the Warriors. The Warriors just have so much depth, it's crazy. And they're getting, like, Clay's coming back nice. Andrew Wiggins contributing a lot. They got such a deep team and just guys that can give you 20 any given night, and they're constantly, the way they score like 20 points like nothing, it's incredible to watch, and I think there's a good chance that they win everything. They can win the championship this year. I do think it's going to be an interesting, like this year, and actually like within the last couple years recently, the game of basketball has been entertaining in the playoffs because we get a bunch of different teams that, like, there's no set team that's going to win it all every single year. There's no super team like we saw in the past with the big three Heat, and then you had the Warriors, and like even before that, there was still like the Lakers and the Celtics big three. Like, it seems like we've always had, favorite, like, teams that are going to be the favorite going into the finals, going into the playoffs and everything. And this year, it's just like it's so up in the air. Like right now, I think it's probably going to be the Warriors. But before that, I thought the Suns had a good chance before they lost last round. And then in the Eastern Conference, it's like, the Celtics, the Bucks, the Heat. A lot of these teams have a good chance to make it every year. And then, like right now, looking at the Celtics Heat series, I'm not even sure, how this is gonna play out. As a Heat fan, the last game kind of sucked. Kind of getting blown out by the Celtics in Game 2 at home. Now we got to go back to Boston, and they've got the home court advantage in the series. So I do kind of like at this point, and I think it's just coming off of a tough loss, but it feels like the Celtics have a good chance to make the finals. I'm hoping the Heat are able to rebound. Really, what we need to do is take a game away from Boston at home. So if we can win Game 3 or Game 4, then we got the home court advantage back, and I think we got a better chance to win the series that way. And I mean, Boston's lost games at home in the playoffs this year. I think they lost a game or two at home against the Bucks. So it's certainly possible. But if the Heat show up like they did last game, then they're definitely not going to win this series. Last game, it was like really just Jimmy Butler having moments of greatness, stretches where he would just score the ball every time he touched it, and the rest of the Heat, like, they weren't really contributing a whole lot. Kind of a blowout. Game 2 was 127 to the Celtics and 102 to the Heat. And then Jason Tatum, he had a big game too. He had 20 points in the first half, and then pretty much only played the third quarter because they were blowing him out so much at that point. They just subbed him out. But he had 27 points, and this year Jason Tatum's really taken things over. It's been fun to watch. He's becoming a superstar. One of the better players in the playoffs, and he's had one of the best, playoff runs up to this point. And then, just to touch on Game 1, Jimmy Butler had a good Game 1 as well. He had 41 points, and he led Miami to a 118-107 win. And the Celtics kind of closed it out late in the fourth in garbage time. The Heat were kind of blowing them out for a lot of the game. But it was like, so now we're going into Game 3, and I think it's gonna be an interesting series. I think there's a chance this goes 7 games. But I'm really interested. And for the Heat, it's like Jimmy Butler can't have to give you 40 every night to win a game. That's a tough position to have to be in. Like, you need a lot more contribution from the rest of your players. Like, Jimmy Butler's having an amazing playoff run, and you got an opportunity to make the finals. And I'm just hoping someone else on outside of Butler steps up, give Jimmy Butler some help, and then let things work. And Jimmy Butler's still gonna have those games most likely. So if you get some more help from the other guys, then there's a good chance you can come back and try to win this series. But it's definitely going to be a fun one. I'm looking forward to the rest of it. With the Mavs Warriors, like I would be very surprised if that game goes more than 5, maybe 6 at the most games. But the Heat Celtics, I think, is going to be a tighter series. And then just the other night, we finished the NBA draft lottery. So the results came out, and the number 1 pick in this year's draft class is going to the Orlando Magic. And then the number 2 overall pick is going to the Oklahoma City Thunder. The number 3 pick is going to the Houston Rockets. Number 4 to the Kings. 5 to the Pacers. So I'm just going to kind of cover the top 5. Kind of like we did with the football video, I'm definitely going to do, like with the NFL mock draft, I'm going to do a really detailed NBA mock draft. Probably going to release it around a week before the NBA draft. I like to just give these things some time so I have an idea of like what actually might happen. Maybe some trades happen prior to the draft that are already cleared up. And then with the NBA specifically, usually the draft, like the order before the draft starts. The NFL is like a little bit more up in the air. Typically, like, this year we had an idea who might be the number 1 overall pick. But like a lot of the other picks were totally up in the air. But for basketball, sometimes the first few picks are, kind of solidified. But this year's going to be very interesting in that sense because it might not be like that this year. We might really come down to the draft before we find out like what's actually happening. Because this year, in my opinion, you've got 3 prospects that could potentially go number 1. They're all talented enough to be the first overall pick. And it's just going to come down to how the teams grade them overall. Like what do they like more, and what they're looking for in the player that they select. Because the Magic, Thunder, and Rockets, they all 3 need bigs. And in this draft class, you got Chet Holmgren out of Gonzaga, you got Jabari Smith out of Auburn, and then you got Paulo Banchero out of Duke. And literally all 3 of these guys look like they could be number 1 overall picks. They've all 3 got like very unique skill sets. So Chet Holmgren is a 7-foot player who can pass the ball. He's got good handles. He can shoot pretty well, and he's very good at blocking shots. So, and he can move the court really well as well. So he's a very interesting prospect. A lot of people compare him to like a Kristaps Porzingis type player. I can certainly see some of that, but I think he could be a higher level player in the next level in the NBA. I think he's got a ton of potential. And then the other 2 guys, Jabari Smith out of Auburn. This guy's like 6'10", and he's just got a super smooth jumper. He can shoot from all over the court. And he's also got length and so he can block shots, get a lot of rebounds as well. So he's a very good prospect. And then you got Paulo Banchero out of Duke, and he's also, I think he's 6'10". He's the more powerful guy among the three. If someone's more likely to dunk on somebody, it's probably Banchero. He can also shoot the ball pretty well. Decent passer as well at Duke. A lot of people said he got a lot better overall his freshman season. So I think it's interesting. He's got a nice post game as well. So like all three of the guys, they provide different things, and then the top three all need big men. So it's gonna be fun, and these are gonna be young teams that got a lot of talent. So like the Magic, for example, they've got a bunch of young guards. Last year, the Magic selected Jalen Suggs out of Gonzaga. It'd be cool if they paired him with Chet Holmgren, another Gonzaga player, and I think Holmgren and I think they played together in high school, I want to say. And then the Thunder, you've got Josh Giddey, you got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So you got a lot of young, good players on the Thunder, and you're going to pair that with a good big man. And then the Rockets as well with Jalen Green. So all of these teams are going to be doing some things. The Kings at pick number 4, they kind of, I don't think they were supposed to draft this high, so I'm sure they're stoked to have the 4th overall pick. They could use one of these bigs, so I'm sure they'd be super happy if one of these guys slides. But then there's a couple other guys in the draft class that are really interesting. Jaden Ivey out of Purdue. He's a really good guard, super athletic, can score the ball pretty well as well. And during the tournament, he had a lot of really good games, carried Purdue. And then, I don't know if these other guys really have they might not go number 4 overall. But just want to touch on some other guys that I'm interested in this class. Shaedon Sharpe out of Kentucky. He's a shooting guard. And then Benedict Mathurin from Arizona. He's another guy that had just a crazy tournament run. And then there's a guy out of Serbia who has like the identical name to the NBA MVP, Nikola Jokic. He's coming out in this draft class. His name is actually Nikola Jovic. So it's a V instead of a K. But he's a 6'10", like small forward and power forward. He looks like he could be a very good prospect as well. So I think this is going to be a loaded NBA draft class. We're going to get more NBA draft content as we get closer to the draft and everything. But I'm very excited to see how that plays out and where these guys land. I think a lot of these guys have potential to become superstars in the NBA. And then I want to talk about some UFC. So this weekend we got another UFC Vegas card. This one is headlined by Holly Holm and Ketlen Vieira. And Holly Holm's the number 2 overall fighter in the bantamweight division, and Vieira is number 5, I believe. So I think there's a good chance that the winner of this fight is going to ultimately fight for the belt after Juliana Pena and Amanda Nunes have that rematch. So I think there's a good chance this winner is going to kind of be like a number 1 contender, potentially. Their last 2 fights, so Holly hasn't actually fought since 2020, where she got a win over Irene Aldana. She's another girl who's in the top 5 of the division, I believe. And then Ketlen Vieira had a win last year over Miesha Tate. So they're both coming in off a win, and then I think this next fight can catapult them into a title shot. And Holly Holm, I think that would be a crazy fun story. I think she's 40 years old. She had like the knockout of all time, like against Ronda Rousey. She was like one of the biggest underdogs ever, and she got a knockout and became the champion of the world. So to see her regain that belt, I think that would be pretty cool. But yeah, I think that's going to be a cool main event. And then we've got a few other fights on this card that I'm really excited for. Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Michel Pereira. These are both very interesting fighters. Ponzinibbio has really good boxing and like leg kicks and everything like that. And then Michel Pereira, or I think it's Pereira, he has just this insane, unique skill set. He's like constantly doing like flips and crazy spinning strikes and everything. And all the commentators always say during his fights that like they think he should pull it back a little bit and and not like fight the way he fights as much, but he's just constantly fighting like that, and he's a ton of fun to watch. He makes for entertaining fights every time he fights, just based on his style, like doing Superman punches off of the cages and everything like that. So I think that has a potential chance to be the best fight of the night. Both really good strikers that are going to come forward and give each other a good fight. And then Eric Anders versus Park Yun Jong at 185. I really like watching Eric Anders' career. So way back, I think in like '09, he was actually a linebacker on Alabama. And I've been watching college football for years. I think he was even on the championship Alabama team. And then he transitioned into MMA. And it's funny because like you hear about some other guys like Greg Hardy was an NFL player, so a lot of people talk about him as like a football guy that transferred over. But Eric Anders being a high level linebacker for Alabama, it's pretty impressive. And he's had a pretty long, like successful UFC career. He's always fun to watch. He's got a ton of power in his hands, and I really like watching him fight. And then a couple fights on the prelims that I think are going to be really fun. Chase Hooper versus Felipe Colares. These are really good grapplers. They're both kind of young, and Chase Hooper's 22 years old, and then Felipe I think is 28, so he's still kind of young. He's still got a lot of time left in their career, and they're both very good grapplers. So I think this is going to be an interesting matchup. A lot of times these matchups become either stand-up striking fights, or they're just, we get to see who's the better grappler, basically. So I think that's going to be entertaining to watch. And then Jonathan Martinez versus Vince Morales. This is a bantamweight fight, I believe. But these are both really good strikers. I think it's going to be a high-paced fight. A lot of action in that. That's another fight that could potentially be, one of the best fights on the card this weekend. And then a heavyweight fight. So Jalton Almeida versus Parker Porter. So Jalton Almeida is a guy from Brazil. He's 30 years old, and he's a prospect. Like, he's definitely on the come up. He might be a potential contender eventually. This is a guy who's got high level jiu-jitsu. He's a huge dude, athletic, super powerful hands, and he's a heavyweight as well. So I think he could be dangerous for anybody that he's fighting. And then Parker Porter's fun to watch too. Parker Porter, he might not be like as in shape and everything physically, but he's got decent boxing as well, and he's always wrestling really well. And I think he's gonna try to wrestle and get control over Almeida. And then like Almeida's just got a lot of power and explosiveness. So we'll see how that fight plays out. I think that's gonna be entertaining to watch. And then I want to touch on this thing that Khabib's kind of been pushing lately. So the Eagle FC, their Eagle Fighting Championship, this is Khabib's organization that he bought. They had their 47th event today. And I'm not going to cover all of the fights. I just want to talk about this rumor that's kind of going around. And that's that Junior Dos Santos would potentially fight Fedor Emelianenko if he was able to get a win here. And so basically Khabib, before this fight happened, he was saying that he's going to talk to Scott Coker, the president of Bellator, and they're going to try to put together a cross-promotional event where you pair up Fedor with JDS. So you basically have like two legends, two guys that they didn't get a chance to fight like in their primes. So that's like a very fun fight to put on. And I think it could still possibly happen despite the fact that Junior Dos Santos lost tonight. So he was fighting Yorgan De Castro, and in the first round, Dos Santos did a good job kicking De Castro's legs and just picking those apart. And then, things did get a little bit more difficult. Castro's just trying to throw bombs. He landed a couple nice shots, but he didn't do too much damage to Junior Dos Santos. I think JDS won the first round and then the second as well. But then I think this was like in the beginning of the third. JDS like threw a punch, and like dislocated his shoulder or something. Like it was bad, and like not like Jorgen De Castro didn't even throw anything damaging or anything. It was just JDS like throwing a punch at a bad angle or something. So he had this just fluke injury that resulted in him losing by TKO, I believe. So like the way he looked, he looked really good tonight. So I think you could potentially still make that fight. Like it's not like JDS got KO'd or anything. He was winning the fight at that point. He just so happened to have like a fluke injury. So I think there's still interest in that fight. There's still two legends of the sport, two guys that never got to fight each other either. So I'm interested to see if that happens. But let me know. Let me know if you guys are interested in a potential Fedor versus JDS fight. Let me know what are you interested in the UFC this weekend. What you think about the playoff series that we got going on? Eastern Conference Finals, Western Conference Finals. If I'm making my prediction right now, I'm leaning towards Celtics Warriors, but I think there's a lot of moving pieces, and it's going to be an entertaining series on both parts. But if you like the content, please like and subscribe to the video, and thanks for tuning in.